has the relationship between Queen Camilla and Princess Catherine taken a sour turn? Here's why a heated moment between the two at Queen Elizabeth II's funeral has royal watchers talking.
It wasn't scheduled on the royal calendar. No cameras were present. No trumpets echoed through the palace halls. And yet, what happened inside Windsor Castle changed everything. Beneath its towering stone walls, behind heavy wooden doors closed, to the outside world, a secret unfolded that would send shockwaves through the very foundations of the monarchy. On that night, in the flickering warmth of candlelight, amid whispers too quiet for history books, a ceremony took place, one that could only be described as revolutionary in its symbolism and consequence. Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, was not crowned by law nor proclaimed by Parliament, but she was chosen in spirit, and that alone made it the most dangerous act of all. Only a handful of insiders were present, each carefully selected and sworn to silence. The chapel, located on the grounds of Windsor, had hosted royal weddings, burials, and christenings, but never anything like this. No cameras rolled, no guards saluted, and no royal announcement was ever made. But there, beneath the stained glass gaze of the ancestors who came before her, Kate stepped into history's shadow and emerged with something far more powerful than any golden crown. The quiet, unshakable approval of those who mattered most within the palace walls. It wasn't just a gathering. It was an anointing, a passing of legacy, done not in spectacle, but in sacred solemnity. The Archbishop of Canterbury, aware of the weight this moment carried, stood before her. He said no grand proclamations. Instead, his words were soft, deliberate, almost whispered, as if afraid the walls themselves might betray the truth. He didn't speak of royalty as a right, but as a responsibility, of grace earned, not inherited. And then came the moment that marked everything. A small vial, allegedly the same oil used during Queen Elizabeth II's coronation, was uncorked. The Archbishop reached out and gently anointed Kate. Just a drop. But in that silence, it echoed louder than any parade. It wasn't legal, but it was louder than law. It was spiritual, emotional, and deeply symbolic. Those watching didn't applaud. They didn't dare. They simply stood, breathless, knowing they had just witnessed the rise of a queen not by blood, but by belief. Outside the walls of the chapel, the world remained unaware. No tabloids ran the story. No breaking news ticker hinted at what had transpired. But inside the monarchy, the tremor had already begun. This wasn't about paperwork or protocol. It was about momentum, and that momentum now belonged to Kate. Her rise wasn't forced or demanded. It was invited by those who saw in her not just a title, but a future. A steady hand for uncertain times. A queen the people already trusted long before a crown ever touched her head. But while Kate stood in serene silence, one person was left completely in the dark, and her reaction would tear the palace apart. She wasn't invited. She wasn't warned. When Camilla found out, it felt like a dagger through the heart. The palace, with all its whispered traditions and silent rules, had closed its doors on her. Not in public, not through a scandal, but through omission. Days passed before the truth crept its way to her chamber. Not through Charles, not even through official aides. It came in the form of a shaken whisper from a junior advisor, too horrified to keep the secret any longer. Kate had been anointed. There had been a ceremony, quiet, sacred, and completely hidden from the queen consort. Camilla froze. The teacup in her hand trembled. Then, without warning, she stood up and slammed it against the nearest table. China shattered, shards scattered across the floor like splinters of her dignity. Her scream followed, sharp, guttural, not just from anger but from heartbreak. Years, no, decades of calculated restraint, bitter compromise, and public endurance came crashing down in that single moment. The betrayal wasn't just ceremonial, it was spiritual. And it wasn't orchestrated by a tabloid, a journalist, or the British public. It was carried out by her own family. What broke her wasn't the secrecy of the act itself. It was the silence. The fact that Charles hadn't said a word. That William, her stepson, the one she had tried so hard to support, had done it without flinching. Camilla had clawed her way into a role she was never meant to have. She had endured decades of being the most hated woman in Britain. She survived being booed at royal events, cast as the villain in Diana's tragedy, and ridiculed as the woman who stole the prince. But through it all, she believed there was redemption in the crown, a future where she could finally be seen as more than the scandal that defined her. And now, that hope was ripped from her hands silently, mercilessly. The emotional blow wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. The crown, which had once felt heavy with the weight of history, now felt hollow. She wasn't just excluded from a room, she was removed from legacy. The ceremony wasn't legal. It didn't alter the line of succession. But it didn't have to, because in the monarchy, perception is power. And with that single act, Kate had become the queen, in waiting not on paper, but in spirit. Camilla was left with the title, the jewels, the formalities, but none of the reverence. This wasn't the betrayal of headlines or gossip. It was the kind of betrayal that only royalty could deliver, elegant, silent, irreversible. Camilla had fought, too hard, for too long to be cast aside like an afterthought. And though her screams had quieted, the storm inside her was just beginning to rise. Because Camilla wasn't just angry, she demanded answers. And when she confronted William, she got far more than she bargained for. When Camilla confronted him, William didn't flinch. His words stunned the queen consort into silence. There was no shouting, no loss of composure, just a cold, unshakable certainty in his tone. "They already see her as queen," he said. And in that one sentence, the air between them shifted forever. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a declaration. One that carried more power than titles, protocols, or even the crown itself. Camilla had come expecting an apology, or at least a denial. What she received was a truth so direct, it left her breathless. William didn't hesitate, because to him, the path forward was already clear, and it didn't include clinging to the past. He didn't see the monarchy as a rigid structure protected by rules and hierarchy. For William, it was something far more fragile, an institution that could only survive by adapting, by earning the people's trust, not demanding their loyalty. And in that vision, Kate wasn't just his wife. She was the cornerstone, the emotional future of the monarchy. Camilla had a title, but Kate had something far more powerful, the nation's belief. And William knew belief couldn't be commanded, it had to be earned. He wasn't interested in rehearsing his father's mistakes. He was ready to rewrite the playbook entirely. His calm wasn't a sign of weakness. It was strategy. Every move he'd made up to that moment had been calculated. He had started by quietly trimming the monarchy's public face, downsizing ceremonial roles, redirecting media attention, and drawing public focus away from outdated customs. Camilla's presence was never overtly diminished, but her spotlight dimmed subtly, deliberately. Fewer mentions in press briefings, fewer appearances with key charities, fewer invitations that carried symbolic weight. Nothing loud enough to spark headlines, just a slow shift in momentum. And all of it toward Kate. Because for William, the monarchy couldn't afford to limp forward under the burden of yesterday's scars. It needed to be reimagined, clean, youthful, emotionally resonant. And in that new world, Kate was already the queen in people's hearts. That secret ceremony wasn't just about symbolism, it was a message, a spiritual pivot, a recognition that tradition alone wouldn't keep the monarchy afloat. What would was connection, and the public had chosen Kate without hesitation. Camilla stood there, listening, hoping for even a flicker of remorse. But none came. William's gaze never wavered. His silence between words cut deeper than the words themselves. This wasn't rebellion for the sake of power. It was a reshaping of legacy. And as he turned to leave, he didn't offer explanation or comfort, just clarity. The future had arrived, and it didn't need permission from the past to claim its place. With the crown no longer just about ceremony, the real battle began not in public, but deep within the palace. One clawed her way through scandal. The other rose without struggle. But only one could win the people's heart. That was the quiet war being waged behind palace gates. Camilla had endured the unthinkable. Decades of whispers, jeers, and accusations. Her name forever entangled with tragedy, betrayal, and public fury. The shadow of Princess Diana never truly lifted, and Camilla knew it. Even when she finally stood beside Charles as queen consort, the applause was polite, never passionate. Her path had been paved with fire, and though she survived it, the scars remained. She was the queen by appointment, but never by affection. Then came Kate, effortless, poised, untouched by scandal. From the moment she entered the royal spotlight, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Where Camilla was once met with protest, Kate was greeted with celebration. Where Camilla had to retreat and wait for public approval, Kate had it before she ever asked. Her style was elegant, her presence calming, and her image carefully protected. She was everything the public hoped the future of the monarchy could be. Modern, relatable, graceful. In a world where perception was power, Kate already reigned without ever needing a crown. The media made the difference even more stark. Camilla had been dragged through the headlines for years, mocked, villainized, frozen in the public imagination as the woman who destroyed the fairy tale. But Kate, she was the fairy tale. Every gown, every gala, every glance turned into front page praise. And while Camilla fought to be tolerated, Kate was adored. The imbalance wasn't lost on anyone inside the palace, and certainly not on Camilla. She watched, quietly, carefully. And the more Kate's star rose, the more Camilla felt herself fading into the background. It wasn't jealousy, it was fear. Fear that no matter how high she climbed, someone else had already claimed the summit. Inside the royal household, loyalties began to shift. Slowly, at first. Subtle. Aides who once served Camilla began requesting transfers. Staff once loyal to Charles's inner circle were leaning into William and Kate's vision of the future. It wasn't spoken aloud, but the tension was everywhere. The crown, they understood, was moving not physically, but symbolically. With every appearance Kate made, every engagement she attended, she drew more of the monarchy's center toward herself. Camilla still had her office, her schedule, her title, but increasingly, she felt like a placeholder, a relic in a monarchy, desperate for renewal, and that reality pierced deeper than any headline ever could. Camilla's insecurities, once buried beneath regal ceremony, were beginning to rise. Her smiles were still practiced, her posture still queenly, but inside, she could feel the foundation cracking. She had climbed the mountain the hard way, only to find the peak already occupied by someone who hadn't even broken a sweat. But this wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was about legacy, influence, and the future of the crown. Behind the velvet curtains, the palace had split in two. What once operated as a unified royal household was now a kingdom quietly fractured. Two centers of gravity, two competing visions for the future, and a silent war for the soul of the monarchy. On one side stood Charles and Camilla, relics of a reign shaped by recovery, protocol, and damage control. Their power was rooted in tradition, in hierarchy, in the well-rehearsed rhythms of royal life that had been preserved for centuries. On the other side, William and Kate, a pair not just ascending in title, but seizing the emotional reins of the nation. They weren't merely heirs, they were architects, and they were building a new monarchy, piece by piece, from within. The shift didn't come with declarations or defiance. It came in whispers, in the hallways, in the shifting loyalties of those who served behind the scenes. Courtiers who had once moved at Camilla's word now lingered longer in meetings with William. Staff who once handled the logistics of Charles's appearances began to prioritize Kate's diary. Some requested transfers. Others didn't need to. The message was already clear. The energy, the influence, was shifting. Camilla could feel it, in the way eyes averted just a second too long, in the careful wording of briefings, in the silence after her speeches. The palace wasn't hers anymore, not truly. This wasn't just politics, it was generational. A quiet uprising. The younger aides, the rising strategists, the digital-savvy thinkers behind palace messaging, they saw it clearly. The world was moving, fast, and the monarchy couldn't afford to lag behind. William and Kate represented relevance. Streamlined, media-friendly, emotionally resonant. They were Instagram in a world of parchment scrolls. And more than anything, they understood the moment. They didn't just preserve royal identity, they evolved it. Charles, ever the pacifier, tried to hold the center. But his inaction spoke louder than any public statement. His silence after Kate's private anointing, his failure to rein in the internal divide, only deepened the chasm. Camilla, once a necessary partner in stabilizing his image, now found herself sidelined not by malice, but by momentum. Buckingham Palace began to resemble two royal courts, the ceremonial and the emotional, one occupied by titles, the other by loyalty. And yet, the most telling moment came not in whispers, but absence. An event Camilla was scheduled to lead a diva, cornerstone of her public image, a chance to reassert her role. But she didn't show. No explanation. No formal statement. Just silence. Behind the scenes, insiders knew the truth. She'd seen the guest list. She'd seen who was speaking, who would be seated front row. And she knew, if she stood on that stage, the crowd wouldn't be looking at her. Because Kate would be there, already commanding the spotlight without lifting a finger. But the clearest sign came when Camilla disappeared from an event she was supposed to lead, while Kate stood center stage. It was her event, her platform. But Camilla never showed up. The Royal Foundation Summit had been penciled into her calendar for months. It was supposed to be a crowning moment, a demonstration of her leadership, her place, her permanence within the royal machine. But as the cameras flashed and the audience took their seats, Camilla's name was never announced. Her chair remained empty. The press called it a last-minute illness. Insiders whispered another truth. Camilla knew exactly what the night would become, and she refused to stand in the shadow of a future she could no longer ignore. Behind palace walls, the reason for her absence was no mystery. She had read the run of show. She knew who would speak, who would host, who would be honored. And at the center of it all was Kate, poised, beloved, and increasingly untouchable. It wasn't a stage Camilla was afraid of, it was irrelevance. She had spent years clawing her way into public favor, building a reputation that barely held beneath the weight of history. But now, no matter what she said or did, Kate's presence eclipsed her own. The risk of appearing diminished, overlooked, or forgotten in front of a live audience was too much. So, she stayed away, not out of weakness, but out of silent defiance. Kate took the stage with the ease of someone who didn't have to prove anything anymore. She didn't command the spotlight, it came to her. Every word, every gesture, every applause felt like confirmation. This wasn't just admiration, it was coronation in real time. The royal family's next chapter wasn't just beginning. It had already begun. While Camilla's absence was quietly downplayed, Kate's performance became the night's defining moment. Guests whispered about her grace, the media celebrated her leadership, and the public, once again, reaffirmed where their allegiance truly rested. Even Charles couldn't hide the shifting tides. He stood silently, hands folded, eyes lingering too long on Kate as she received standing ovations that once would have belonged to his wife. He didn't speak of Camilla's absence. He didn't offer excuses. And in that silence, the divide deepened. Whatever unity had once existed at the top was fading fast. Camilla had been Charles's partner in rebuilding the monarchy. But William and Kate were its rebirth. And those within the palace were beginning to pick sides. The most striking shift came not from speeches or public displays, but from the quiet defection of loyalty. Staffers who once served Queen Elizabeth's inner circle, the unwavering defenders of order and legacy, had begun moving toward William and Kate. They weren't loud about it. They didn't announce their realignment, but their loyalties were changing. Because they saw what the public saw. A crown slowly tilting toward a new head, a monarchy reshaping itself around the people's queen, not the one handed her title, but the one who had earned it. And then came the whispers of a ceremony that was far more than symbolic. One that everyone inside the chapel would never forget. No throne, no trumpet, just a quiet chapel and a future rewritten. In a world obsessed with ceremony, where every royal gesture is choreographed and every appearance carefully calculated, this moment broke every rule. There were no crowds, no red carpets, no gilded thrones. Yet within the ancient stone of Windsor, something profound unfolded. In silence, under the watchful gaze of royal ancestors and sacred tradition, Kate Middleton was not crowned by law, but by something far more powerful: conviction. It wasn't a coronation by decree. It was one of spirit, of lineage, of purpose. A moment that was never meant to be seen, but one that redefined the monarchy forever. Those present never raised their voices. There was no applause, only reverence. The altar stood quiet, candle flames dancing in the stillness as the Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward. He didn't speak of royal blood or inherited right. He spoke of legacy, of burden, and of grace. Then he turned to Kate and delivered words that would ring through the heart of the monarchy like a prophecy. "You were not chosen by blood," he said. "You are chosen through grace. The future will look to you not for your status, but for your integrity." And in that moment, with tears barely held behind steady eyes, Kate bowed her head not in fear, but in acceptance. From a small vial, said to hold the same sacred oil used at Queen Elizabeth II's coronation, a single drop was drawn. The Archbishop anointed her no crown, no orb, no sword, just oil, just faith. The symbolic echo of queens before her, the i.e. spiritual weight of the crown, passed not through ceremony, but through belief. Those who witnessed it, advisors, clergy, aides, did not speak. But their silence said everything. They stood not in duty, but in recognition. This was not a wife being honored. This was a queen being affirmed. Kate didn't flinch. She didn't falter. Even as the moment pulled at her emotions, she remained poised. Her calm was not the absence of fear. It was the presence of purpose. She wasn't stepping into a role she had demanded. She was embracing one that had already been placed upon her shoulders by the people, by history, and now, by the quiet force of monarchy itself. As the final words of the benediction were whispered, "In spirit and in service, rise now as the queen who will be," a shift occurred that no royal decree could ever reverse. No cameras recorded it. No headlines captured it. But within that chapel, history pivoted, not toward spectacle, but toward something deeper. A future built not on formality, but on trust. And in that trust, Kate was no longer just the Princess of Wales. She was the monarch in waiting, not because the crown demanded it, but because the people already believed it. The chapel doors closed that night, but the storm it unleashed was only beginning to roar through the kingdom. She still wears the crown, but no one sees it anymore. Camilla walks the corridors of power, adorned in jewels, greeted with protocol, referred to as Her Majesty. And yet, none of it feels real. Not anymore. The throne she once fought so hard to reach has become a seat of shadows, an echo of influence, rather than a source of it. She shows up at official events, stands beside King Charles, smiles for the cameras. But there is a hollowness to it all, a quietness behind the titles. Because while the world continues to call her queen, the heart of the monarchy has already moved on. It began subtly, a shift in energy, not position, a growing sense that her presence was no longer essential. Where once her speeches were anticipated, now they're politely tolerated. Where her initiatives once made headlines, now they're barely footnotes, beneath photos of Kate. She still fulfills her duties, but the spark is gone. Inside, Camilla feels it. That creeping realization that despite the title, she is fading. That the public looks past her, not because she's done anything wrong, but because someone else has already captured the nation's imagination. The despair she carries isn't loud. It doesn't erupt like it once did behind closed doors. It sits, heavy and unshakable, growing with every new event, where Kate stands at the center and she quietly takes a seat along the margins. The palace staff feel it too. Their conversations revolve around William and Kate. Their schedules shift to accommodate the new focal point of royal life. even longtime aides, who once stood by Camilla during the years of public backlash, now whisper about the future and they speak of Kate, not her. And it's not just logistics, it's loyalty, allegiance, emotion, the kind of intangible reverence that no crown can command, only earn. The people don't hate Camilla. Many even admire her journey, her resilience. But admiration has never been enough to build legacy. Not in this family, not in this institution. And while Camilla remains respected, her relevance has been quietly stripped away, not by scandal, but by comparison. Because William and Kate don't just attend events, they define them. They don't merely represent the monarchy, they are the monarchy in spirit, in energy, in the public's gaze. What Camilla holds is a relic of the past. What they embody is the future. It's a shift no proclamation can reverse, no appearance can undo. The emotional crown, the one that truly matters, now rests with Kate. And Camilla knows it. She may never say it aloud, but inside, she carries the weight of a role she holds in name only. A throne that feels increasingly distant. A reign that feels like a formality, not a fact. Her story, once defiant and determined, has quietly transitioned into something far more tragic. She is seen, but not watched. Present, but not followed. And loved only in memory, not in motion. In the quiet halls of Windsor, only one truth echoes. Now Kate wears the crown not on her head, but in the hearts of the people. Drop your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.